We were asked to talk about how we go about our research. 25 years ago, when we started exploring ceremonial stone landscapes, Mary noticed that site after site contained stone cairns with the same variety of designs. That led her to theorize the designs contained a language. A mound on the ground was in contact with the earth. A mound on top of a boulder was in contact with the boulder, not the earth. A split stone was filled with small stones. Next slide. To begin to study these different designs, it was necessary to develop a classification name for each design. So our classification defined stone cairns by their characteristics, creating a neutral name. This was important as there are many kinds of stone piles out there. Field clearing piles, property boundary piles, hiking trail cairns, and ceremonial cairns or piles. Whenever a research project is begun, it's necessary to start from a neutral standpoint. The researcher needs to approach the project with the idea, I don't know what is there, and collect the data, and then analyze the data to find out what types of piles are present. One site we visited in Connecticut had ceremonial stone piles in one field, and in the next field, it had field clearing piles. Steve uses his own simplified classification when he sends us his photos. Mary then converts it to our more complex naming system. An example, Steve classifies all stone piles placed on top of boulders as boulder top cairns, or BTC for short, in his emails. And the broad scope of the name does not allow our researcher to look at the numerous designs, such as a single layer on top of a boulder, a vertical wall on top of a boulder, a mound on top of a boulder, and so on. So Mary needs to differentiate that into a more specific design to do her analysis work. Next slide. Now let's look at Manitou-Hashinash Reserve, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Steve and Todd documented 1,024 cairns, niches, enclosures, and effigies. Using our classification system, Mary identified 24 distinct different cairn designs at this CSL. And I took Steve's GPS points and created this map that we're seeing on the screen. Each dot represents one of these structures. One of the things Mary noticed immediately that there was different densities of cairns. She wanted to know what was going on with those density areas. Did they mean something? So she tracked specific designs of cairns by the different density areas. And one of her findings was the high density areas which had the densest concentration of stone structures per square footage, contained only small and medium-sized cairns, but no large cairns. In comparison, the low-density area on top of the hill contained the large cairns and only a few small and medium-sized cairns. So the small and medium-sized cairns can easily be built by a small group of people as a one-time ceremonial event. In contrast, the large cairns are the work of a whole community of people contributing to the cairn over a long period of time. That suggests that there was an annual gathering each year, and the community was adding to those large cairns with each annual ceremony. These two simple facts show a high-density area was likely a different time period from the low-density area. There was a different way about going about having these ceremonies and conducting them. So without knowing the exact purpose of each and every one of these individual cairns, we can still learn something about what was going on here. And in this case, it suggests the site contains different time periods. Next slide. After all of these years, Mary has been able only to decipher small snippets of the language embedded in these stone structures. Effigies are one of the easiest. The problem is anyone can claim a structure looks like a turtle, a snake, a bird, and so on. And it's often a highly opinionated process. So the key is to find ways to support your theory and improve your identification. This wall is the wall that's in this photograph is a straight length. It's about 3 feet high by 2 feet wide, and is finished on one end. The opposite end has a short section that appears to be broken down with a large triangular stone propped on its end, which is shown here in the slide. Is it a snake effigy? Well, there's no serpentine layout to the wall, and part of it is an intact farm wall with a finished end for a gateway. So how do we go about analyzing something like this? Well, let's start with a triangular-shaped block of stone. Are there any other examples of intentional use of triangles at this site? Next slide. This cairn has 3 triangular slabs. A large triangle slab leans against the side, with a smaller triangle slab underneath it. Now, this is clearly intentional. It's just not a random placement of stones. Next slide. This split stone cairn has a massive triangular block for one side of the split. And the split has stones wedged into the split. Next slide. So this cairn was built on top of a low base stone and up against a tall glacial boulder. It has a small tunnel underneath it where the 2 base stones meet. And above one end of the tunnel is a triangular stone. So these examples prove that the triangular shape was incorporated into the stone structures, and therefore the triangular stone block at the end of the stone wall that we first started out talking about can be confirmed as a ceremonial feature. However, it doesn't prove that it's actually a serpent. Next slide. On the same site, a little further away, is a serpent enclosure attached to an elongated glacial boulder with a triangular protrusion at the top end of the boulder. This structure confirms serpents at the site had triangular-shaped heads, and thus confirms the wall with the triangular stone at the end of it is likely a serpent effigy. Next slide. So the next step in the analysis is to do a little bit of interpretation. And the triangular snake head has plug and feather quarry marks showing it was created in the 1800s. These are drill marks from steel tools. So that allows us to search accounts from the historic period. Next slide. The Pequots held a ceremony witnessed by early Dutch settlers. Quote, "They have a hole in a hill in which they place a kettle full of all sorts of articles, and then a snake comes in," end of quote. A Stockbridge Mission Native American said, quote, "Shabbahash was an honored chief among his people and bore tattoos in the likeness of a snake on both cheeks," end quote. These 2 historic accounts confirm that serpent images and ceremonies were an active part in the southern New England tribal communities. And it fits with the historic serpent ceremony enclosure and serpent wall at this site. Next slide. So while exploring a site in Kent, Connecticut on the Schaghticoke Reservation, Mary uncovered a serpent effigy on the top of an extra large split stone cairn with thousands of stone prayer offerings. It looks similar to the serpent mound in Ohio, in which the serpent is swallowing a round object. The Schaghticoke continued to hold a rattlesnake ceremony into the early 1900s. It was definitely modified as the Indian men went out in advance of the ceremony and collected snakes. They placed them in pillowcases. On the ceremonial day, they invited the whites to join them. Without the whites knowing, they released the snakes from the capture. So serpents live in the underground, which is in a spiritual underworld. Splits and crevices in the rocks are considered portals to the underworld, and therefore creating a serpent effigy on top of a split stone cairn makes logical sense. The thousands of stones in this cairn are prayer offerings to a spirit from the underworld. Hold up a second. So the white participation in the rattlesnake ceremony answers a question I've had. I've often wondered how the Native Americans could hold such large gatherings on this site, in particular during the 1800s, without the whites knowing about it. The likely scenario is the whites did know about these ceremonies and may have even been invited to join them, like in Connecticut. In conclusion, the historic part of the Manitou-Hashinash Preserve site is attributed to Lawton Foster the Younger. He was the third and last generation in his family to continue the great revival of Native American ceremonies that began around the year 1800 and lasted to about 1900. He died in 1907. Lawton was responsible for a serpent ceremony at the site we just visited today. Earlier in life, he appears to have assisted his father Jonathan, whose farm is a quarter-mile southwest on Lawton Foster Road. His father held a springtime rainwater ceremony and possibly an underworld ceremony, as evidenced by 2 ceremonial stone chambers. And some of you may have got to see those today. Lawton's grandfather also set up a ceremonial site on his land, which is located along Route 3. And the elder Lawton held a ceremony associated with the sun, as the ceremonial stone chamber is oriented towards the winter solstice sunset. So there are 3 ceremonial sites, were part of a larger group of sites expanding outward onto neighboring farms. So there appears to have been a community of Native Americans in the area of Lawton Foster Road. This is consistent with ceremonial stone structure sites, as they're often found clustered together. So I want to thank you for allowing me to speak briefly today. And if you have questions, feel free to come see us afterwards. We'll be here for a little bit longer. And I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing your next speaker, Doug Harris, from the Narragansett Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And the title of his presentation is Let the Landscape Speak for Itself.